Hello, YouTube. Welcome to 2023 and first video of the year. So, as I mentioned before, I'm going to be doing some stuff with the MediaGX, or in this case, a Geode that was the very last version of the MediaGX before I think it started switching over to AMD-based core. Or Athlon based. Anyway, yeah, right here is one of those funky MediaGX motherboards that you've seen floating around on eBay. I've already opened it before, but I've never actually run it. And yeah, today we're going to be doing exactly that. We're just going to plug all the stuff in and run it. And as you can see, I've also finally cleaned up the dresser that I do all this stuff on, so we'll just set this stuff aside, and yeah, right here is the motherboard. It's a standard micro ATX form factor, and rather than having a Intel or AMD or whatever chipset, this has a chipset made by Cyrix, and I guess National Semiconductor as well. And yeah, so let's go ahead and start building it. I just realized I did not even bring out any RAM. Okay, give me a moment. Okay, so after retrieving some of the additional parts that I'll need, so yeah, I have the RAM here. The user's manual specifies that only supports up to 256 megs total of RAM, but you know what? I have these two 512 megabyte sticks of SD RAM, so let's just see how that goes. And instead of a hard drive, we're just going to be using a 32 gig SD card and adapter, and also going to be using this DVD CD drive. And yeah, let's see. Additionally, because these things don't particularly like being set up in a 2-drive configuration, I'm just going to be connecting them to the individual IDE channels here on the board. And lastly, to power it all, I just have this Hi-Pro power supply. It's got pretty decent output on both 5 and 12 volts. Wow, that really did not focus. There we go. Yeah, 20 amps on 5 volts and 16 amps on 12 volts. So that's going to be plenty enough for what should be a relatively weak processor, you know. And then, yeah, just power button and PC speaker. And you may be wondering, where is the graphics card for this thing? And that's where the MediaGX comes in, because this, in a sense, was sort of the spiritual predecessor to modern AMD APUs. And in fact, eventually, after Cyrix, it was National Semiconductor, which you can see their logo there, barely, that acquired the MediaGX brand, and they later sold it to AMD, which, as I mentioned before, eventually swapped out the internal core for one that was based on a low-power Athlon. And so, yeah, technically we're working with an APU here, and because of that, we have integrated video. And one more thing before I start assembling stuff. Even though this does say socket 7 here, MediaGX processors are not socket 7 compatible. They're only physically compatible, not electrically. And let's see. Also, yeah, this board is only for MediaGX-M processors, which is where this comes in here on the manual. And even though this is branded as a Geode, this is still pin compatible with the GX-M. So anyway, yeah, let's go ahead and start opening stuff. So just gonna unseal this, and this is aftermarket packaging, so yeah, it's originally some sort of ink cartridge stuff, but yeah, whatever, the seller packaged it in this, so we'll just be using that. We'll take it out of the definitely not anti-static looking foam. And notice that this is also just a mobile BGA package slapped onto an interposer. You can see the little BGA balls there. So yeah, this was definitely something that was more targeted towards the mobile markets than desktop usage, but people still made desktop boards anyway. Let's see. Okay, no bent pins. I was wondering why this processor doesn't seem to be going into the socket, but I guess it just, I don't know. There we go. And instead of using thermal paste, I'm gonna try using these graphite thermal pads instead. So let me just open this as well. Should be plenty enough to cool the MediaGX, so I'm not particularly worried about anything overheating, but let's still just hope that it goes well. I really do not like this sort of plastic. Alright, there we go. We have that open. And we'll just take this out, and that is almost a perfect fit. So, let's see, I think it did mention, yeah, it's graphically conductive, so I will have to cut this down to size a little bit first, just in case. And that will also mean that this might not necessarily be usable with some bigger chips in the future, now that I've cut it down to size. But that should provide some decent coverage as far as thermal conductivity goes. And then for the cooler, let's just use this socket A / socket 370 cooler that I typically use with socket 7 boards like this. Over here. Okay, and so after a minor amount of off-camera cleanup, as well as adding that little speaker over there, I think we're ready to power up. So, without further ado, let's do just that. Ooh, that was immediate. Okay. Yep, looks like we have the CPU running. And the fan is running very quietly as well. I wonder what voltage it's running at. Don't say anything about that. Okay. Yeah, there's like barely any airflow, but I guess if it works, it works. So let's just go ahead and turn that on. And yeah, the CMOS battery is very dead, as you can see. We'll disable that because we don't have a floppy drive here. And we're going to leave everything else at auto. Let's see, anything else? I think we will have to change this to D. CD-ROM, okay, good enough. Let's go ahead and turn on the USB controller as well. And that too. This is a very modern BIOS for something that's technically still socket 7. Okay, integrated peripherals, let's see. Okay, nothing to change here. Oh, that's interesting. Built-in CPU audio. Looks like I can set compatibility for it. Okay, not necessarily compatibility, but yeah, either way, it's letting you, well, letting me set exactly what values to feed into the onboard sound. So that'll be interesting. And Steam got monitor support. So that's also interesting. And I can toggle how much video memory. I have a lot of RAM installed, so I'll just leave it at that. And let's just make sure that I can detect everything. Yeah, that's good enough. 32 gigs, that's exactly what it is. Okay, let's save and exit. Since this is gonna still be powered on, I don't think that I necessarily have to worry about saving anything with a battery. So yeah, you just saw there 266 megahertz, and it does seem to only be able to see up to 256K of memory, so I guess that's good enough. Anyway, let's see if it's able to boot off whatever I still have on this SD card right now. Because I do still have something on it, I just don't remember what. And the answer appears to be no. Okay, give me a moment while I fetch an installation disk. Okay, and we finally have Windows 98 installed, and as you can see, the mouse works, which means that, at the very least, the USB HID driver has been installed automatically. So, now let's go ahead and install the rest of the drivers. I'm just gonna eject the Windows 98 disk here. So, editing Tonkus here, and well, the Windows 98 installation kind of rolled over and died after I installed all the stuff. Like, it was fine with the drivers, but once I started installing the benchmarks, it just did not want to work anymore. So I ended up wiping the drive and installing Windows XP instead. So yeah, that's what you're going to be seeing in the next clip. Alrighty, so as you can see by both the lighting and the fact that I now have, speakers there, it's the next day and I have Windows XP installed instead of Windows 98 because Windows 98, I don't know, it was just being unstable and it ended up crashing while I was installing Java to the point where I could not do anything except for a full reinstall. Anyway, yeah, with Windows XP, even though we aren't able to install things like the chipset driver for chipset, or anything, just because it's, one, built into Windows XP to the point where it's usable at least, and two, because the chipset driver in this case is just the PCI to PCI bridge that I think is used for the integrated graphics, which are currently disabled because I have the GeForce FX there. Yeah, it's still fully functional. Also, instead of using the built-in Sound Blaster audio, I have just a USB sound dongle there, so whatever. Anyway, yeah, let's just pull up some specs. So I have both CPU-Z here, as well as hardware info 32. So one interesting thing about this is that, if I remember correctly, I mentioned in the previous clip that this does support CMOV, and that in hardware info 32, it reports the CPU as having AMD branding, though that might just be due to hardware info 32 itself seeing the MediaGX GX1 tag there, because yeah, it's a little bit hard to see right now just because of how far out the tripod is. It's kind of hard to zoom in, but come on, there we go. Yeah, that's, I think, about as good as it's gonna get. But yeah, you can see the specs there. I'm just gonna pull the phone a little bit closer. So yeah, MediaGX GX1, start up hardware info 32. I'm just gonna pull this back now while that launches, just because, yeah, anyway. So, yeah, I guess while I'm waiting, I'll give it a little bit of history. So, the MediaGX was Cyrix's attempt at integrating both sound and video onto a 2-chip solution, which included the MediaGX itself, which is the CPU and everything, and the chipset, which, if I remember correctly, handles some of the graphics workload, as well as the audio. But, like, the main logic for most stuff, from what I understand, is on the CPU itself. And so, yeah, there we go. You can see right there, NSC/AMD Geode GX1-267, so this is running at 266 megahertz. And let's just close that. Just to reiterate, this does support CMOV, surprisingly, which was not mentioned on what little documentation that I could find, aka Wikipedia, on this chip. So this is apparently at least partially 686 compatible. Though, if we take a look over at CPU-Z, as far as actual performance goes, let's see, where's the Pentium 200? There we go. Let's just run a quick CPU benchmark there. And there we go. Yeah, as you can see, a 200 megahertz Pentium MMX does quite soundly beat out this chip. And I think that is probably because, just based on both looking at the motherboard as well as just the specs listed, there is no L2 cache on this thing. It's just that 16 kilobytes of L1 cache, and that's it. And so, predictably, even though we do have support for up to OpenGL 2.0, thanks to the GeForce FX card there. Wow, that is blurry. Yeah, even though we do have support for that, performance is absolute garbage. Even worse than the S3 Verge. Actually, no, I'd say about on par with the S3 Verge when paired with, I think, what, it was like a 120 megahertz Pentium or something? I don't know. I do not remember exactly. It's been a few months, but yeah, performance is trash, that's the point. So, let's just go ahead and jump into some attempted Minecraft gameplay. And this is just using the same .minecraft folder that I pulled off the disk image for the Windows 98 S3 Verge thing. Log in. Play offline. And there we go. And yeah, as you can see right there, 0 FPS. And this is in Minecraft Classic as well, so there's a limited world size. So it's not like it's trying to render in additional chunks, especially at this render distance. You can see, not only see, but you can taste the fog in front of me right now. Okay, looks like it just captured the mouse, and ooh, 0 FPS. Oh, we just hit 1 FPS for a moment there. And yeah, as you can see, Minecraft on a MediaGX, especially at this clock speed, is completely unplayable. It might be a little bit better once I try and overclock this to 330 megahertz, but I don't really have much confidence in that. So let's go ahead and close out of the game before it causes any physical pain to watch. And let's instead go into 3D Mark 2001 SE, which totally will run better. And yeah, just to reiterate while that's launching as well, just one last time, let's look at the specs. So, for the expected garbage fire, that is the performance that we're going to be seeing in 3D Mark 2001 SE, I pin the blame, hey, Get out of the way, banner. I pin the blame solely on on the fact that there's only 16 kilobytes of L1 cache, as well as the fact that the bus speed itself is only a paltry 33 megahertz, because unlike regular Socket 7 chipsets, and especially unlike Super Socket 7, the chipset on this board runs at PCI bus speeds. It doesn't have an internal clock of 66 that downclocks to 33 for PCI. It runs at PCI speeds because PCI is the main CPU bus itself. Though granted, that's also the case for other chipsets of the era, but point is, those other chipsets usually ran the CPU bus at much higher clock speeds compared to this. And yeah, considering how I'm pretty sure that this is a somewhat stripped down Cyrix M2 core rather than a Cyrix 5x86 core, thanks to that CMOS support, I'm pretty sure that the CPU itself is somewhat capable at the very least. Just heavily nerfed. Anyway, let's get into benchmarking.
Wow, a frame!
And there we go. Apparently, the system sucks so much that it wasn't able to run all the tests, and as a result, was not able to generate a score. Fun. Well, I guess next up we attempt some overclocking, I guess. So let's go ahead and turn off. Guess what? Overclocking didn't do a thing. It could only overclock to 300 megahertz, and even then, there was zero performance improvement. So, yeah. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video. Bye.